Good afternoon and welcome to our fourth edition of Support for Businesses and Self-Employment through the coronavirus crisis. My name is James Mattam. I'm here from Tax Assist Accountants, and I'm also joined with two other colleagues, Sam Skyring and Darren Moore, who are going to talk you through all of the developments and announcements that have been launched by the government to help the self-employed and small business owners. We're going to do about 20-25 minutes worth of slides to explain all of the updates that have come out. There haven't been too many major announcements in recent times, so we wanted to give you a nice overview and just run through all of those. And then we're going to have a questions and answers session at the end of this webinar where you can ask any of the questions that you may have, probably a bit more specific to your scenario. Now, we have got on screen a disclaimer just to explain the advice that we're going to be giving in this session will be generic, and it'll cover the announcements that have been made by the government. However, we would always recommend that you speak with a professional if you do need individual help and engage with a good quality accountant to help you through these times, because they are probably very stressful times, very worrying times, trying to understand what sort of support is out there. Okay, so as I mentioned before, joined by two colleagues, two qualified accountants who are experts in the subject matter, going to walk you through that. I'm going to be making sure I look after all the Q&As that are coming through, signpost, and do what I can, but then we'll line some questions up towards the end. And who are Tax Assist Accountants? Well, we're a national network of accountants servicing 77,000 small businesses and self-employed professionals right across the UK. We operate 350 locations where you can interact with a local Tax Assist accountant and get the support that you need. So today we're going to be covering that government support and how accountants can help, and I'll just quickly signpost you to our website. We've got a lot of information on there. Obviously we're going to be covering a lot of that in this session, but you can find that all on our website, taxassist.co.uk. And a quick announcement, we've finally closed off our survey. We asked over 70,000 small businesses and self-employed professionals to give us their views. What are they worried about? What's happened? What's been their experience throughout this crisis so far? And we've had an overwhelming response. So if you've filled out that survey, thank you very much. We've just closed it off this lunchtime, and on the back of those responses, we've been able to get some national coverage about the plight of small businesses and directors and self-employed professionals who've been left behind. So we are getting your voice heard. We're working hard on that, and there'll be more coverage ideally on the back of what we announced today in the Times. So go and check that out online. As we've said before, from the Rishi Sunak's come out with a lot of announcements, but he has encouraged that nobody will be left behind, so we are championing that message for you. Now, without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Darren and Sam, and they're going to walk you through these updates. Thank you.
James, thank you, and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us. As James has explained, difficult times. We understand how challenging it is for most, and exceptional times. None of us will have ever lived through this type of experience, and it's had an enormous impact on the business world and the world at large. What we want to try and do today is really give you a bit of an update. Now, it's been a pretty hectic 4 weeks in terms of new announcements, and for those of you that have watched webinars previously or want to watch our webinars on our website, we focused on some specific topics over the last couple of weeks. But because things have moved on so quickly, what we're going to do today is we're going to talk about everything that's out there in its current form. And we're going to give you an overview because there's a lot there. So 20-25 minutes is really an opportunity for us to give you a flavour of some of these things and to go through some commonly asked questions about. And you'll have the slides if you need them afterwards, because there's a bit more information in the slides, but it's really to give you an idea of everything that's out there to support you as an individual, as a business, as a shareholder, as a company director, because there is a range of support available. So we're going to break it down into areas, and you'll see from the agenda 5 key areas we want to talk about. We're going to talk about employers and employees and the various support that's available there. We'll talk about taxes, and particularly some deferral of taxes. We'll talk about self-employed and the main scheme that's in place for the self-employed, which is significant but not in yet. We'll talk about business rates, property owners, tenants. There have been some quite significant changes there in terms of supervision and support over the last 4 or 5 weeks. So we'll try and cover that off very quickly for you. And then we're going to look at the funding available at the end. So that's primarily around loans. Lots of news about loans, lots of effort put in to try to provide them. So we'll just give you a quick overview of what they are and how they work. So 5 key areas we're going to tackle, but we're going to start with employers. And we're going to start with the main scheme that's really there for employers, which is around furloughing, which is a phrase you would have heard, I'm sure, in the press over the last few weeks. So Sam, do you want to start off on the furloughing side?
Lovely. Well, hello everybody, and thanks for joining us today. So, as Darren just mentioned, we're going to start with employers, in particular furloughing generally. So this is whereby, I appreciate this is not a term commonly used, but this is basically where you can, staff are not going to be working for you, but rather than obviously make them redundant or lose them, this scheme actually covers a chunk of their wages. So you can keep them on your payroll and have them at the end of this crisis that we're going through at the moment. So what this actually means is furloughing, also referred to as job retention scheme, actually covers 80% of the usual monthly wage costs up to a maximum cap of 2,500, plus the employer's national insurance contributions and employer's automatic enrolment pension contributions. So those will also be added on top of the amount that you'll receive from the grant. So who can actually be furloughed on your payroll? So anyone that was on your books as at the 19th of March 2020, but that also includes any employees that you may have actually made redundant since the 28th of February, because obviously that was quite back in the early stages. No one knew how this was going to look and what support was available. You may have made that early decision to save some costs, but please rest assured that you can hire those staff members back, formally get them back on your payroll, and then obviously furlough them. Now, the one caveat that we must stress here is that you cannot work as an employee once furloughed. They cannot do any work for you as an employer. The one sort of caveat to that, the only thing they could do, which you may find useful, is they can voluntarily complete any training. This has to be purely at the employee's own discretion. The employers cannot encourage it or ask them to do it mandatory. But obviously this will help any workers that maybe have been furloughed, give them something to do, help them upskill themselves in this slight downturn whilst you're receiving the grant. Now, again, the last bullet point you can see is quite an important one here actually, because when you furlough a staff member, you're classifying them as furloughed, and this actually is then part of employment law. So you are going to have to make this decision in writing to the employee, okay? And because it involves employment law, we do strongly encourage you to speak to professionals when it comes to this matter, to make sure you get all your paperwork correct, to make sure that your claim for this grant stands up. So a couple of other points just to mention. So employees on sick leave or self-isolating should get statutory sick pay, but once that's finished, they could potentially be furloughed. Any full or part-time employees on a salary you can claim for on or before the 19th of March 2020. For those employees that are on a variable pay, so they might be based on hours, etc., then you can claim for the hire of either the same month's earnings from the previous year or the average monthly earnings from the 19-20 tax year. Now, that element there is where some of the complications kick in. It's all to do with the calculations of how much you can claim. Okay, because again, we're looking at those two elements for average on top of comparing to the standard 2.5. So just be aware of that when you're doing these calculations. We do recommend maybe just speaking to your accountant, speaking to us, just to make sure you get the figures correct, because HMRC have made clear that they are potentially going to audit and look back at all the claims when things calm down. So you want to make sure you get it right. So it's constantly developing, so you want to make sure you understand the rules. As you can see there, make sure you speak to your accountant, seek legal advice, make sure you have a clear plan in place. You know, don't just look at the needs of the business now, look at what may happen in the future. Any cash saved now can help you later down the line. Design a process that can be repeated if necessary. Again, you don't have to do it as an all or nothing approach. So you could furlough some staff now, keep some staff going. You could then swap, bring those staff back, then furlough some other staff. It's purely flexible in relation to that, but the only criteria you have to be aware of is the minimum furlough period is 3 weeks. Currently up to the maximum of 30th of June, but again, that may be subject to be extended in the future. And again, as you can see there, just make sure you keep a clear audit trail. And what we mean by that is paperwork, your payroll systems all up to date, should be enough to see you through. So how you actually make the claim once you've done all the sort of hard calculations is HMRC have launched a portal. It was launched Monday of last week. Very successful. They had a hell of a lot of claims in the first day, and we've included a link so you can follow it through to that portal to make the claim. Now, as you can see there, you can actually make the claim yourself, but just be aware that you would need an PAYE account in order to do that. So if you haven't got one of those, or you don't want to go through the rigmarole of creating one of those, then by all means speak to your accountants, because they can do these claims on your behalf, and dare I say, give you that peace of mind that it's done correctly. Okay, now you're all fascinated, and the most important part is, when are you actually going to receive the funds from this grant? Now HMRC have stated it can take up to 6 days. We haven't actually heard of whether that is true or not as of yet, so we're sort of waiting in the wings to see if that is an accurate timescale, but we're hopeful it should be not too far off. And as you can see there, as I've just mentioned, the scheme runs till the end of June, but it may well be extended beyond that. Just a bit of information on this slide about what you actually need to claim. So I won't go through all the bullet points, I'll let you read those at a later date. But just be aware, it's a standard sort of information you'd expect, and especially in relation to furloughing, it's in relation to who you're going to furlough, how long you're furloughing them for, etc., and the claim period. Okay. The next slide is going to be Furloughing for Directors, and I will just hand back to Darren to go through this with you.
Okay, thanks, Sam. Just to follow up on those previous slides, yes, the furloughing system is live. As of last Monday, as Sam said, that's a pretty incredible turnaround, really. The scale of that portal they've created is enormous. Sam talked about huge volumes. I think there was something like 450,000 employers in the first day went through that system, so enormous volumes, and on the face of it, that system is held up well. So early feedback is positive in terms of how the system works. The feedback we're getting from our network is the claim itself, the system is relatively straightforward, but the process of compiling information for that claim and doing the calculations to underpin it, that can take some time, and that's about the detailed rules. So I would reiterate Sam's point about complexity there. Just get some advice from your accountant if you need it, because there are things in there that can catch you out. The other point to make about the flow of funds, just a quick update, Sam, hot off the press as such. The first claims from Monday last week have just started coming through. So we've actually seen evidence, literally in the last hour or so, of that money starting to flow through into bank accounts. So on the face of it, the 6 working days that they agreed with, or they talked about up front, has been delivered. Hopefully that's a sign of things to come in terms of that all-important cash flow you need. So the system is there, but it's complex. What I want to talk about is one particular challenge with the system, which is fairly well publicised, and we have talked about a number of times before, which is what we perceive as being a level of unfairness for directors in particular. And I'll explain what we mean by that. So lots of small companies, hundreds of thousands of small companies in the UK. 1 to small numbers of directors in the vast majority of cases. There's a question about how furlough works for them. So furloughing can work for directors. Directors can furlough, but there are some practical issues there just to think about. The first issue is what the guidance talks about. Now, Sam has talked about not working. Now, if you're an employee, that's feasible. It takes some working out in small business in particular, but that's feasible. If you're a director, can you really separate yourself completely from the business? Now, the legislation or the guidance so far has talked about you being able to provide certain company secretarial basic services to the company, so things like annual accounts, basic bookkeeping perhaps, but is that practical to say you're not going to do more than that? If you're looking after your own business as a company, you want to stay in touch with your contacts and with your suppliers and with your customers, that would suggest you can't furlough. We've been waiting for guidance on that situation for some time, and it's still not available. So that's a practical issue we have to try and deal with. The second one to deal with is around how directors are typically paid. For those of you that are directors out there, you'll understand. But there's a convention almost that you get paid a relatively small salary through PAYE, and the rest of your income comes through dividends. So you taking out profits from the business. The scheme, the furloughing scheme that Sam's been through, only covers salary. So it only covers the bit that goes through PAYE, which could be £8,000 or £9,000 a year for many directors out there. The dividends are likely to be higher in a profitable company, but there is currently no way that those company directors can get support for those dividend amounts. It will only be for the payroll figures. We think that's unfair. And I'll talk later about our view on a number of areas that we think perhaps need addressing. But this is one that we think is just not realistic in terms of the ways that directors are paid. So if you are company directors, and we've got a couple of questions in already from company directors, we'll pick up at the end. It is difficult, we recognise that. Limited options at the moment around minimal furloughing, probably then other forms of support, including universal credit, which is a harsh reality, unfortunately, where we are. So we'll come back to the concerns we have at the end, but that's why we've flagged furloughing for directors, because we know it's a particular issue for hundreds of thousands out there. Okay, thanks, Sam.
Thank you. The next thing just talk about in relation to employees, statutory sick pay. Now, as you're probably aware, this has been around for years, but the main change comes from the fact that previously statutory sick pay was not government funded. The employers are required by law to pay it to their employees off sick, but they don't actually get any funding for it. Whereas, because of the coronavirus, the government has announced that you can reclaim statutory sick pay as an employer for up to 2 weeks. Currently, the rate is £95.85 a week. Another slight change is that an employee can receive this from day one of being off sick, if they're off sick as a result of the coronavirus. Whereas previously, under the old rules, general statutory sick pay, you could only claim it from day 4. Okay, so they're the two important changes to be wary of. You can see there that this is only available to employers with fewer than 250 employees. Okay, so if you're a small business, hopefully that's a nice little welcome break for you. Again, you can see there, the key with all of this is to make sure that you've got detailed records of anyone that's off sick as a result of coronavirus in your payroll software, any paperwork that goes along with that. And again, I don't know if we've seen the scheme live yet. I think they're still working on it, from what I understand. So we're still waiting for that scheme to go live in order to claim that refund. So it's even more crucial to make sure you keep those records in a payroll system if possible, or dare I say it, passing your payroll over to a payroll provider will help you with all of those as well. Holiday. Seems a little bit odd to be talking about holiday under the circumstances. No one can go anywhere or do too much, unfortunately. But it is worth mentioning because, if you've got staff that have been furloughed or they're not really able to work from home, or just generally because they're not going away anywhere, they don't need holiday. So you may find that as an employer, you have employees wanting to cancel holidays. As a nice caring employer, you probably agree, they've got nothing to do, might as well carry on working if they can. But obviously what that means for you, repercussions of this, is that later down the line when things go back to normal, you as an employer potentially are going to be faced with all your staff wanting to go on holiday at once. Okay, and that's not really going to be feasible for a business perspective. So what this welcome deferral scheme coming in for holiday means that you can actually, employees can defer their holiday, carry it over the next 2 annual leave years. Okay, so that will give you a chance to plan for your employees to still get their holiday entitlement, but for you as a business to plan it in to make sure there's no adverse effects on your business. Okay, so a little bit more flexibility there. So the next section that we've got here is taxes. So we've got 2 main ones here: VAT deferral scheme and income tax. So with the VAT deferral scheme, they're both quite similar really in the sense that they are basically deferring payment. Okay, unfortunately you've still got to pay it, but just much further down the line. So key point with these, especially the VAT one, is you have to make sure you file your VAT return. Okay, that hasn't changed. The only thing that's changed is that your VAT payment, any payments due between the 20th of March and the 30th of June, you have the option to defer the payment to a later date, and by that we mean up to the 31st of March 2021, so next March. Or if you want to, and cash isn't an issue, you could pay it as normal. It is your choice. The good thing with this scheme is it's automatic, so you don't actually have to do anything. It's just if you don't want to make the payment now, you don't make the payment. The good news is that if you don't make the payment now, there will be no penalties or interest for the late payment. But again, one of the sort of planning points around this is even if you think at the moment cash is okay in your business, think of the longer term. We don't actually know when this lockdown will end. We don't know what when things start being eased, what it's going to look like. You know, so you really need to protect your cash. So it's worth to, you know, dare I say it, not pay it, put it in a bank if you're cautious about, you know, you don't want to spend it. But at least you've got it then. It's not in HMRC's pocket. So think about things like that. And if under your VAT scheme, you pay your VAT payment by direct debit, which a lot of businesses do because it makes your life a little bit easier, just make sure that you cancel the direct debit, because if you do not cancel it, HMRC will take those funds out of your bank account. Okay, so if you want to take advantages, cancel that direct debit. Okay, we put it in red, it is key. So please make sure you're thinking about things like that. With the income tax, this actually affects payments on account. So for those of you within self-assessment, if you have payments on account due, the next one being 31st of July, you can defer that payment until the 31st of January 2021. Again, this is automatic. You don't need to do anything. You just don't make the payment. And again, no interest or penalties will be charged if you defer until the end of January 2021. Now, the problem with this is that not everyone has payments on account. So again, it's only going to affect a few of you that have that. But again, it's worth thinking about if you are affected, deferring it just to help your cash flow. Lastly, it's just worth mentioning, time to pay arrangements been around for a while, but in particular in relation to this, businesses and self-employed in any financial distress with any tax liabilities potentially will be eligible for support from HMRC's time to pay. You know, HMRC realise the circumstances that businesses are facing. They do want to try and help. So if you are having difficulties with any finances, please do speak to HMRC, or more importantly, come and chat to us, your accountant, and we can talk you through options that are available to you in relation to any financial. So what we have next is income support for the self-employed. So the general sort of background behind this, as you can imagine, we talked about furloughing employees, which also affect directors of their own companies. But for self-employed people, they were excluded from that. And what this is trying to do is trying to give them the same sort of relief, but obviously it has to be a bit different because it's for self-employed. So what we get here is you will get a taxable grant worth 80% of your trading profits, up to a maximum of £2,500 per month for 3 months. As you can imagine, the grant that you receive, like it is for furloughed employees, is going to be subject to income tax and national insurance, but the grant does not need to be repaid. Again, just on the back of this, it's worth just mentioning that if you do make a claim for universal credits, any grant you receive will be treated as part of your self-employed earnings. So it may affect the actual amount of universal credits you receive. So it's just worth bearing that in mind if you are in receipt of those. So in relation to who's eligible for this, so you must have submitted your self-assessment tax return for the year 18-19. HMRC did give a deadline of 23rd of April, just gone. Obviously that's just passed, so hopefully you got those in. You must have traded in the 19-20 tax year. Are trading when you apply, or would be, except for the coronavirus. And your purpose is to, you intend to trade on the other side of all this, okay? In relation to your actual trading profit, must be less than 50,000, and more than half of your income must come from self-employment from the tax year 18-19 or the average of the years 16-17, 17-18, 18-19. And you can see there lastly, if you started trading between 2016-19, HMRC will only use the years for which you file a self-assessment tax return. Okay. In relation to applying for this, at the moment you cannot apply for the scheme. HMRC will contact you if you are eligible for the scheme and invite you to apply online. Now we've been told that this is around mid-May time, and we'll keep you updated with that if anything changes. They have made a point of saying that any funds won't actually come through until June. So again, there's going to be a little bit of a delay there. So worth just factoring that in. But again, you know, obviously until you get that, you may be able to claim sort of higher universal credits in the meantime. So again, just sort of planning opportunities to think about there.
I'll have a quick talk through the self-employment scheme that Sam's talked about. Is yet to come in. We're talking about people being notified mid-May of their eligibility, with mid-June a likely date for the scheme being open, the portal that the government will develop being launched, and claims being made, and money's flowing through. So that's still a little way off. So we're probably best part of 2 months off money actually flowing through. Inevitably, what self-employed individuals want to understand is, what am I likely to receive? There are lots of reasons you need to plan. So you need to understand what you might be receiving down the line. Now, the difficulty with that is the rules are quite complicated, actually. Sam's given an overview there, but as always, there's a bit of detail behind it, which can make it a bit more difficult.
Yeah.
So what we've done to try to help is we've pulled together an approximation tool, if you like. So we've pulled together what we're calling our self-employed grant calculator, which you can find on our website, which will give you an understanding of how it might affect you. And I'll use the word might carefully, because you will need to do a detailed calculation with your accountants down the line. But this will give you an outline of what it might be, which we hope will help you from a planning point of view. So the details are on the screen there. If you go and look for our website and find that calculator, you've got some basic information to plug in. That should just give you a feel of the sort of amount you're looking at. So please do go and use it and see if that helps you.
Lovely. The next section, just to talk about business rates. Okay, now I will just point out that this section can get a little bit complex. So I'll go through a rough overview for each country, and then, as I said, the slides will be available afterwards, so you can spend a little bit of time to read through. But if we start out for England, we've got small business rates relief, £10,000 grant. You can see there, nurseries, they're given a sort of payment holiday. We've got the retail, hospitality and leisure sector getting holiday, and you can see further down, depending on the rateable value, they can get various grants. With all of these, I will just point out that initially when they brought these business rate reliefs in, they were basically implying that you as a business didn't have to do anything. The councils will contact you, they would sort it all out. That isn't actually the case. So if you haven't heard anything for any of these, please get in touch with your local authority. And the best advice to give here is go to their websites, because some of them aren't actually taking phone calls, etc. So start with their websites, and there should be information to guide you through what you need to do next. Okay. Northern Ireland, again, you've got small business rate relief, £10,000 grant. Again, you've got in further release for the retail, hospitality and leisure businesses for various grant amounts for depending on their rateable value. Rate bills for 2021 were due to be issued in April, but to avoid the financial pressures, they're not going to be issued till June. And they also brought in this hardship rate relief scheme available for non-domestic rate payers. Okay, so again, have a little look through those. For Scotland, again, we've got the small business rates relief. We've also got various extra schemes for the retail, hospitality and leisure sectors. We've got a full year's 100% non-domestic rates relief for retail, hospitality and tourism, now including airports and associated businesses. We've got a 1.6% relief for all properties, effectively freezing the poundage rate next year. And they're extending the go live date for the deposit return scheme to July 2022 and halting the introduction of the visitor levy bill. Wales. Now, Wales they've introduced quite a lot, to be honest. So again, you've got the sort of ones that we've been seeing on previous slides, just slight differences there. And they've actually brought in childcare, 100% relief until the end of March 2022. Post offices, 100% relief for rateable values up to £9,000, and between 9 and 12, 50% relief. But also, the Development Bank of Wales will be offering businesses, customers, a 3-month repayment holiday, just to help them. And then the Economic Resilience Fund was created, but hot off the press today is they've actually paused it because they've been inundated with so many that they've obviously decided to pause it. And what they're saying is they just want the time to assess how the funds are being used, what funds are left, and how best to use them going forward. So we'll keep you updated as to what's happening there. Okay, and then I'll just hand over to Darren.
Thanks, Sam. We'll wrap up by looking at funding available, and primarily the business interruption loan scheme that's been introduced recently. Sam's talked about lots of different initiatives there, some of which are for individuals, some for businesses. But an awful lot of businesses are already under stress and have been looking at funding and different sources of funding. So this particular scheme was introduced by the government to try to deal with the anticipated demand for short-term, medium-term finance that lots of businesses will have. And as you can see from the slide, it's designed to give you access to a whole range of different support structures up to £5 million for up to 6 years, with some generous rules around interest payments and guarantees provided by the government of up to 80%. So in theory, a very good scheme that will hopefully help a number of businesses out there. Now, we do know there's been some publicity around this scheme, and some of you will have heard this. The scheme has been relatively slow to develop. I think that's fair to say. The banks and other lenders, and there's now 40 plus lenders involved with this scheme. It was slow to develop, but it is gaining momentum. So we would encourage businesses to look at their cash flow and look at possible gaps in their cash flow and think about how this sort of funding might help you. Just a few things to remember. I think there's a follow-up slide on this one, Sam, possibly. Okay. If we go back to the slide then. The application process is probably key here. It involves, yes, talking to banks or talking to funders, but it also involves producing a certain amount of information. And it could be latest financial information. It could be some idea of your likely cash flow going forwards and how it interacts with other support. So do have a look at the scheme details. Again, there's more information on our website which may help you. Do talk to your accountants if you're interested in applying to the scheme, because the best way to success is probably to make sure you're best prepared, and that involves having information to hand. So I think that's probably our best advice. Look at the scheme rules, yes, talk to your accountants and see how they can help you and advise you. Okay, thanks, Sam. So, I talked earlier about some concerns and our views on the support package. This was always going to be very difficult. For any government to respond to this type of challenge is probably near impossible. And there's an awful lot that's there in terms of intervention and support. So we're not criticising what's there, but what we are doing is recognising there's a lot that isn't there, and there are lots of gaps that we think need to be addressed. And there's 3 main gaps that I'll talk about. I've talked about directors already, small company directors, hundreds of thousands potentially, who will have to fall back on low-level furloughing claims and potentially universal credits. And we've got some questions in already on that, which we'll come back to at the end, inevitably. Self-employed. Now, the scheme there is similar to furloughing. It's mirrored around the furloughing scheme, as Sam has explained. But there are gaps, and the gaps we think are mostly around new businesses. Now, the scheme works on profits, and your claim, your grant, is based on profitability or averaging of profits. If you started up fairly recently, so if you started since April 19, then you're simply not eligible. If you started in the last, say, 2 or 3 years, most businesses, when they start, will have losses in early stages. Those losses are taken into account in the calculation, which means on average, you may have little, if any, profits. Doesn't mean to say you're not profitable now, but it's measured on what's gone before, that averaging calculation, which means that some early stage businesses are being penalised effectively for that early loss-making situation, which we think is unfair. There's also a bit of an issue, I think, about there's a 50,000 cap in terms of profits. So if you've got an average of £50,000 and under, you get up to £2,500 a month. If your average profit is £50,001, you get nothing. Now, we think that cliff approach is unfair. Just because you've got slightly higher profits doesn't necessarily mean you can afford to see yourself through this issue, because a lot of self-employed will see those profits as being effectively their pension fund, and they'll be accumulating on that basis. So we just think that's a bit unfair. And the final concern we have is really about the pace of funding, particularly for self-employed. We mentioned June as being a likely date for self-employed to receive monies. That's some 3-4 months after these troubles have started. That's a long time to wait for funding. Other governments have introduced emergency funding more quickly. We know it's difficult, but we'd like to see some recognition of those challenges for the millions that have had to fall on universal credits. And the applications for universal credits have been enormous in the last few weeks because of this, because there's nowhere else to go. So we have some concerns. We recognise what has been done, and we've voiced those concerns in a number of ways, because our job, we've got 77,000 clients, as James mentioned, as a network. Our job is to represent those clients. So we have written to the Chancellor, we've had members of the network petitioning, we've done a survey, as James has talked about, where these views came out very, very clearly, and we'll be using all of that to try to represent the people that we support. So hopefully that will be listened to. We know that those views have been taken on board, not just from us, but from others as well, and we'll keep you informed of any changes that come through. We hope for more positive news. Okay, thanks, Sam. So how can we help? I've just talked about how I think we can help as a profession, as a network. We can help support you and represent you. But what we can also do is just be there for you to talk to through some of these challenges. We know it's difficult. We've got challenges in our business as our network have, and as a lot of you will have. So we're all dealing with this. And it's really complicated because there's a huge amount out there. So there is a need for a single voice, a source of information, and that's what we hope our website is. Interpreting all of these changes is really difficult for anybody. We've got a great dedicated team here and around our network that does just that. So we do understand these things and we can help you. So do lean on us and that expertise we have. And do talk to us about how this is going to affect your business, because the key here is how it affects you now and how it affects you going forwards. Because yes, there will be short-term support. Yes, there will be deferral of certain things, as Sam's talked about. But what happens when that support disappears? And what happens when that debt has to be repaid? What's the impact of that? So accountants have a role to play, I think, to help business owners and individuals with key decisions in their business or personal lives, and looking at how all of this works longer term. So there's a role for us to play there. And we will keep supporting you around signposting for funding, helping you with applications, and linking you to external experts. Some things you can do, some things we can do, some things need other experts. So employment lawyers is an example in furloughing, because there are rules around employment contracts. We can help link into those external experts through the national relationships we have. So lots that we can do as a profession, and lots as we can do as a network to help you. So do talk to us, and do use us as a sounding board. It's not easy being in business. It's not easy doing all these things on your own. So do talk to us and do get help from us. Our network are all in the same boat. They're all small businesses. They're all trying to find a way through this. So just share those experiences and just talk to us if you need to. Thanks, Sam. So I think I've probably covered this. Talk to us. I think I've talked through that one. Get your numbers right. Understanding your numbers and understanding your business and your personal finances is key to thinking about the future. So get some help on that. And as I say, just use us as that central support for all of the schemes and reliefs that are out there. And we will make sure we update everything as we go along. So I think that's everything we need to cover. Questions. Now, I know we've had some questions on the way. We had a couple of questions in advance, so I'll just quickly go through those whilst we look at other things that are coming. So the questions that we received just before the webinar were both actually from directors. One asking from an AD if we could clarify the position with regards to micro, small businesses or companies and directors being furloughed. I think we've covered that one, AD. Yes, you can furlough. If you're a company and you're a director, you can be furloughed. But just bear in mind the things we talked about as we went through the slides in terms of the limits that there may be there. And a question from Laurie, again around being a director. Are there any other options with regards to financial support that directors like myself who pay themselves through dividends can get? Laurie, we sympathise. It is difficult, we know that. Unfortunately, at the moment, that's really going to be things like universal credits, mortgage relief, things that affect you personally. In terms of more business support as a director, at the moment there isn't anything. But we'll keep pushing to see if anything can be built through that petitioning with government and update you when we can. Sam, anything there that jumps out in terms of other questions that are coming? We've had a few, I can see.
What have we got here? So we've got an anonymous. Can an employee who was furloughed in March, then made redundant in April, be rehired again to be put on furlough leave as better compensation for him than universal credits he thought was better than his furlough pay? Again, the problem with that is I wouldn't want to give any particular response, purely because, again, talking about people being made redundant is very much stepping into employment law territory. I would recommend whoever submitted that question either touch base with your local taxist accountant, or if you've got another accountant, just talk to them, because they should be able to put you in contact with an employment law specialist. Or, you know, if you wanted to, give ACAS a call, because they can offer some free employment law related advice, just because it's a bit dangerous to comment on that. And again, HMRC, with all of these schemes, although they're trying to be generous and helpful, they will still audit and look back on these. So we want to make sure that you guys get it right first time. So again, that's just a little bit of a grey area that I wouldn't like to comment on at that point.
Question from Peter. Is there any news on whether businesses and serviced offices where the building owners are billed by the council directly for the rates will at some point be entitled to the small business grant? This is 5% of all businesses, so not insignificant. We agree entirely, Peter. I talked about some of the key gaps that we saw. That's another gap, we believe. It has been talked about. There is recognition of that challenge for those that are in serviced offices and other similar functions. At the moment, there's no news on that one. Again, I know that's been something that's been in petitions. It's been something that's been mentioned through a Treasury committee that was set up back to the Chancellor. Still waiting for action on that one, Peter, but we share that view. As a director, can I furlough even though my first salary was paid April 2020? The company only started trading at end of Jan 20. That's from James. On the face of it, James, I would say probably not, because you didn't have a salary going through as of 19th of March. So apologies. That may be getting some local advice again, as Sam's talked about. So we've got more questions coming in. I'm conscious of time. So what we're going to do is we will pass these questions to our local network to see if there are ways in which we may better support.
Yeah.
We'll also try and build some frequently asked questions on our central client hub, our support site. So do have a look at our website to see if there are questions there that we may have already answered. That's a really useful resource. But I think that's probably all we need to cover for today.
Yeah.
So Sam, unless there's anything else?
No, I think that's everything for me. I just hope you found it useful as a nice sort of summary of the stuff that's about there. But I can't stress enough, these are challenging times for everyone. Everyone's going through it, so don't go through it alone.
Yeah.
And take care, and thank you very much.
Yeah, and I'd reiterate that. We know it's difficult times, unusual times, but we are here to help. Please do talk to us. But thank you for attending this afternoon, and please do stay safe. Thank you.
Thank you.
Lovely, thanks Darren, thanks Sam. Just a quick word from me, because I think Darren and Sam have really covered everything there. We have had quite a few questions in on this session, so we'll make sure we get back to you either directly or via our local taxist accountant network, who are happy to support you. What I would say is, of course, there are going to be hopefully further announcements. We are going to keep pushing the government. So if you'd like to subscribe to our newsletter, just email hello@taxis.co.uk, and we'll make sure we do all our GDPR checks with you and make sure you're happy to be onto those newsletters. And we'll make sure those newsletters are sent out as and when those announcements are made, and we can make sense of them, understand them, digest them, and then send those out to you. Again, we've got the COVID-19 Business Support Hub on the website, where we'll be updating on a regular basis all the different announcements that are made. And again, follow us on social media for any further updates. But thank you very much for attending.